Hey party people. This video is going to be all about tips and tricks on how to prep your illustration for your final color work, whether that is watercolor, marker, or color pencil. I am using my multi-figure fashion illustration inspired by football uniform padding project. This is part of that series, but the tips I go over can apply to any illustration that you do. Okay. Tip number one, when you're working, you want to use a non-sticky tape. Okay, something that you can peel up without damaging the paper too much. I like to use drafting tape or artist tape, and I like to take it a step further and stick it to my clothing and peel it up so that there's lint, little fuzzy fibers stuck to my tape, and that way I'm doubly sure that I'm not going to damage my paper underneath, especially my final paper. If you've seen the other parts of this series, then you know that I drew out the figures first, and then I laid a sheet of tracing paper on top of that, and then I drew out the outfits that I had designed in a separate sketchbook. And then I went to the art store to buy my paper, and I learned that they didn't have the correct quality of paper that I wanted in the size that was my initial drawing. So I scanned everything into my computer and I shrunk everything down to fit the paper that I got, which was 22 by 30 inches. And then here I took another sheet of tracing paper and I started making corrections. You can see the dark areas are where I did the corrections, and then the hazy areas is where I left blank because I was happy with the rough draft underneath. So, what paper am I using for my final? I am using Arches brand, my favorite watercolor paper brand. Arches brand watercolor paper. I'm using 300-pound paper. I normally, like 99% of the time, use 140-pound paper or similar weight paper, 300 GSM, because, you know, most fashion illustration work, it doesn't require the expense of such a heavy-duty paper. But since this one is such an involved project with so many figures, and I'm really invested in this one, and I decided to go ahead and get the nice, sturdy paper. I almost never use 90-pound paper. That's like the lightest category of watercolor paper. It's just too flimsy for me. Okay, so I got Arches brand 300-pound. I don't know what GSM that is. 300-pound paper. I got hot press paper because I wanted the minimal texture. Like, you can still see some texture, which I like, but not so much texture. I enjoy the texture of cold pressed paper a lot of the time, but the number one thing I was thinking about was how much fringe I have in this illustration. I have some delicate chains, I have a lot of beading and pearls, but really the fringe. And if you're drawing a lot of fringe on bumpy paper, your fringe is going to start looking bumpy, and I don't want that. So I decided to go with the hot press paper. And that is actually how I decide on how much texture I want on paper, is like, what fabrics am I rendering? If I'm doing a bunch of chunky knits and denim and, you know, maybe fuzzy things like maybe, you know, shearling, cold press works great. But yeah, with all this fringe, definitely something smoother. The next thing is when you are taping your illustration to the back of your paper, use your plumb lines. You know how in all those fashion figure videos, I'm always talking about making sure you have your plumb line right? One of the reasons is so that you are, you know, aligning your illustration, whether it's one figure or 10 figures, correctly on your paper so that they don't look like they're tipping over. Nothing ruins an illustration faster than the girl looking like she's about to fall over. Plumb lines are basically your weight balance line, and so as long as you have that parallel to the side of your paper, your figures should look like they're standing upright or obeying the laws of gravity. I have plumb lines marked on all of my fashion figure templates and the templates that I use, in my own personal work. And then if you saw the other videos when I was drafting this out, I had a big horizontal that helped with the perspective and the lineup and the plumb lines of all my figures. And so I marked that on the back of this lineup. And I am using my drafting tape, my not so sticky drafting tape covered with lint. And I am using my guide to tape my illustration on there correctly. And then I'm going to take my illustration off camera. I'm going to cut off the excess at the bottom and the top. And the thing I don't like about Arches paper that you buy in single sheets is that they have a big old watermark, like 1.5 inches high on the corner of their paper. And so I taped my illustration to the middle of the paper, and I'm going to lop off the watermark. And I'm going to use the lopped off scraps as my testing as I'm painting. Paints and markers show up differently on different kinds of paper. They react to the paper. And so whenever I'm working on an illustration, I always have a test scrap, and I, as often as possible, try to make that test scrap the same exact paper as my final illustration paper. Okay. Color pencil, I mean, it's just, the stuff is sitting on top, so it's okay. I mean, as long as it's, your final paper is white paper, and so is your testing paper, not like your testing paper is like gray. You know what I mean, right? So I like having testing paper to test out all my colors before I lay it down on my final. I like my testing paper to be as close to my final paper. I've had this lightbox since I was in college. So, 716 years ago, when electricity was a brand new thing. And so, I don't know about this brand. I don't know if they even sell these anymore. So I have no recommendations on that. But there are a lot of good light boxes out there. If you don't have a light box, I have also successfully used a sunny window. That sounds stupid. I've also just used a window on a sunny day, just stood right in front of the window and pressed my paper onto the glass and used the sun to blast the light through my paper. I've used that. Now, if you are tracing out on marker paper, okay, I know a lot of you have seen me do this thing where I draw on the wrong side of the paper and I render on the right side of the paper because I don't like all the pencil smearing that could happen. Now keep in mind, if you use this trick, you have to draw the reverse. Okay, so if you have your file in Photoshop, print out the reverse, or if you don't care about that and you don't have like this extreme perspective as I do in this illustration, just make sure that your asymmetrical designs are flipped. And I'm including like blazers where you have like left over right, right over left, overlapping fronts. Make sure they're going the other way in your drawing. So when you're at this stage, when you are tracing off your illustration onto your final paper, okay, you want to draw as little as possible and you want to erase as little as possible. What I mean by that is, don't draw stuff that you don't need to know the shape of to paint. Okay? I am not going to draw any of my fringe because that's going to go on top later, and I'm probably going to use like color pencil or fine liner. I'm just going to use my rough draft as a reference point for where that fringe goes, but there's no point in painting it here because I'm not going to paint it. Okay? All the little skinny fine chains, I'm not going to draw those either. The pearls and the beads, yeah, I'm going to draw those because I have to paint those individually. Draw as little as possible also means the kind of tool you use. I'm using, don't look at the label on my pencil. This is normally my 4B lead pencil, but I replaced it with an HB lead because I broke one of my pencils. But this is a 0.5 mechanical pencil with HB lead. I'm drawing really lightly, okay? I'm not paying too much attention to my line quality, just trying to keep it as light as possible. I could go harder, like I have 2H and H lead, but I don't like that so much because I'm afraid of carving my paper, okay? Like press really lightly so that you're not marking grooves into your paper, and use a harder lead so that you don't have a lot of smudges and you don't have a hard time erasing what you do need to erase. I would have used a 0.3 lead, but I do this stupid thing where I go through phases where I am very particular about a pencil, and I just wanted to use this one today, and that's why I put lead into this pencil instead of reaching for a different pencil. I'm just finicky like that sometimes. So yeah, press lightly, draw as little as you can, erase as little as you can. You don't want to muck up the surface of your paper. I'm using my 2 erasers that I use all the time. My favorites, my Pentel Click refillable stick eraser, the pink one, and my Tombow Mono, the super skinny white one for detail work, and never leave home without them. So you may have figured out by now, I'm a stickler about pencil smudges and keeping my paper clean and all that. A couple other things. If you are right-handed, go left to right. If you are right-handed, go right to left. Okay, so that you're not smearing your arm on your previous drawing. I'm a big stickler about keeping my hands clean, and so I'm always checking, especially the sides of my hand, to see if I'm smearing pencil lead across my paper. My studio today is so hot that my arm and hand is sticking to the paper. So I'm actually using this scrap sheet of cardstock from a previous project that I was using at Scratch, and holding it under my hand so that I'm not sticking to my final paper. When I am erasing, I very carefully brush eraser marks off. Mostly I blow it off. Yeah, so I'm pretty anal retentive about keeping my paper clean as much as possible. So you might catch me kind of covering my drawing with my other hand, cupping my hand over it. It's because it's hard to see through this paper. Like, I wanted to shoot this kind of during the day so that even with the lights off and the light box on, you could see what I was doing. And usually it's okay, but this is 300-pound paper. So while under normal circumstances, I could trace this just fine. It was just like trying to show y'all what I'm doing. But, you know, there were sections where it was kind of hard to see. So I had to kind of cup around it so that the light, I could block some of the excess light. So that's all I'm doing there. Yeah, so that is how I prep an illustration for painting. I wish I could show you the drawing, the entire drawing that I'm doing, but it started getting dark in my studio and you really could not see what I was doing anyway. So that's where we're going to leave off today. Please do give me a thumbs up if you found this video helpful or amusing or interesting. The next installment in this series, I will start painting. I doubt I'll be able to finish 11 figures in the span of one video, but we'll see. Right now, I'm kind of trying to figure out what color story I want to stick to for this collection. Share, subscribe, and as usual, we are not made of magic, we are made of practice. A lot of you have been talking about how much you want to do your own multi-figure lineup, that you think I'm having so much fun with mine and that it looks so much fun. And yeah, it is a ton of fun and you should totally do one yourself. So go practice, have fun. It's just a bit of paint, a bit of pencil, right? All right, and I will see you in the next video.